find that it's not about differences in personality as much as it is about differences of where people are. Take two brothers. One's the CEO of the company, one's a teacher. They own the company 50-50 together. The CEO takes a 500,000 euro salary, has a company car, has a company ski home, has a company everything. The teacher is a great teacher, makes 44,000 euros a year. They both take a dividend every year from the company. What happens when the older brother says, we're not going to have a dividend for 3 years? He's still got a nice big salary. He's still got the company car, but the other brother doesn't. This is structural. Both brothers are good guys. One sees the dividend as part of his inheritance and birthright, and the other one sees it as something that's elected that he can cancel if he chooses to. And so these are the kind of things we have to prepare for. Next one is separation of management and ownership roles. And that's a good example that I just shared. Extended number of family members and branches. Now you saw on my tree at the beginning, what did you notice about the tree that was a symbol for my chair? It was upside down. Why did I have it upside down? Well, the truth is I didn't have it upside down. The Canadian photographer that took the picture did it upside down. The reason why is he was hired by Jean-Pierre to take pictures of all these famous trees on their campus headquarters outside of Brussels. And he said, everybody shoots trees that way. I'm going to do some trees upside down. And Jean-Pierre is an art collector, and he loves things that are unusual, so they did all the trees upside down. Well, the minute Jean-Pierre and I saw the tree and we're looking for a symbol, we said, that's what we're about. Why upside down? Okay, older generation on the top, which is where it should be. What else? The new generation is the foundation for the future. What else? Why is it upside down, even if it wasn't a family business? It's different. Different to how? The way the business is run. What we want to say is that in the 21st century, the world's upside down. And you better start to think about your world upside down, because it isn't business as it was in the 20th century. Okay? January 1st, it's not allowed to smoke in France. Can you believe that? The French people, when they're babies, smoke. Okay? The French, it's part of the national culture. You cannot smoke a cigarette in a French bar, cafe, or restaurant. Now, is that not a new world? Right? Or you take a look at the French president. I spent half my year in France. Every time, the French tradition is you have very tall men, okay, and very serious men. And what do we have now in France? A very short man with a very tall girlfriend. And a very young, attractive, tall girlfriend. See, France is even tipping upside down. What? They got married today? Aunt Sophie, they got married? Well, you know, he had to do something. His popularity was down below 40%, and a marriage is always good for 10 or 15% with the women voters. Right? So anyway, my point is that we have to start to think very differently about our family businesses and our family. Now, here's another place that becomes different for the next generation. Let's start to really think about the next generation. And as that tree starts to spread out, you know, originally it was over here. You had a senior executive and you maybe had an owner, and that was about it, the two ends. But now in a family business, we've got to start to think about a lot of different roles. A senior executive obviously is a potential for a family member. And a manager is a role. An employee is a role, a board member, a professional advisor. You send your son or daughter away to the United Kingdom and they come back with a law degree or a chartered accounting training, why not use that skill in your family business? But also a family office, the idea of an investment group where you manage the family's money, or a family foundation where you organize the family's charity and philanthropy, or a family council, which is like a board of directors for the family, or an owner. All of these roles come into play in the next generation. And the larger the family gets, the more of these roles you're going to need, and the more activities the family may reach into. So the next generation has to be prepared in a different way. The senior generation was prepared to sell or trade a product. He trained his kids to do the same thing. But as we get into the different generations and we start to become more governors of wealth and directors of companies, we have to start to think in a different way. It's about a bigger picture. I'm going to show you some ideas on that in a moment. Now, another thing that's difficult is that the nature of managing companies changes. Here's the management model in the United States. You've all seen that because it comes out of all the management books. You have a CEO at the top and a couple of vice presidents and some branches. That could be J.P. Morgan, right? Kind of a classic. But you know, this is what we've got at INSEAD that the other schools don't have. We think around the world because you have to think of the Russian model too, right? And then you also have to think a little bit about South Africa. That's the old South Africa. And you have to think a little bit about China, where everybody's on the top. And then you have to think about the Vatican. That's the oldest surviving organization in the world almost, so you have to think a little about them. We have to think a little about Turkey. We're never quite sure who's managing. We have to think about France, my favorite country. You see, you've got sick leave, on strike, retired early, on leave, and on vacation. And that's kind of one of the dilemmas we face when you run anything in France. And then you have to think a little bit about the Middle East. Whoa! But there's an important lesson in this. It's cute, but it is also part of the challenge of aligning a family across many generations in the Middle East area. And so our leaders need to think about this. How are we going to keep this group together if that's our goal? And how do we manage these relationships? I have one for Singapore too, but Singapore is a little complicated, a little simple. It's just a straight line all the way down. Everything works straight down from Mentor Minister Lee, and it works perfectly. Yes?
In this part of the world, I believe that the diversified business is the name of the game. We haven't got really a family which is specialized in certain industry. And I believe that each one in this room who got business is indifferent, actually. I'm talking about oil and gas, petrochemical. I'm talking about my family.
Yes.
Oil and gas, petrochemicals, trading, you name it. We are like 11 industries.
You'll be in 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 different operating companies and groups.
Even if you have a holding company, you haven't got the capabilities to achieve that industry. The shared vision I'm talking about, or the whole group is not there, it's scattered by itself.
Right.
That's why you got that structure over there.
Well, it's a little bit, but that's also kind of a Bedouin tradition too. I mean, there's loose relationships. But we will talk a little bit about holding companies because the holding company is a powerful tool, but the vision for the family, if you want to use it as a tool to hold the family together and to hold the businesses together, it has to be there. When I wrap up with Cargill, they're 150 years old, unbelievable family business, and the part that makes it so much fun, you know what the best part of Cargill is? It's owned by 2 families that don't get along. Okay, and this is not a secret. For 100 years, those 2 families have been feuding because the Cargills only own 1/3 of the company. Their in-laws somehow managed to end up with 2/3 of the company. And so this family business is owned by 2 families that have never gotten along very well, and yet because they do some very important ideas that I want to share with you, they've managed to sustain their growth and keep a shared vision for the whole group. But you're exactly right. Values and vision are the fundamentals of any family business anywhere in the world. If we don't agree on what our values are and what our family is going to contribute and what our business is going to look like, then we should split it all up and sell it. Okay? Walk away because it's going to be just a conflict all the time. I was lecturing in Singapore a few years ago. I was on at 8 o'clock at night. And a young woman came, and she was a reporter, and she came up and she said, "Professor," she said, "this is my first job as a reporter." I figured that must be because who do they send out at 8 o'clock at night to a university but a rookie, right? It's not exactly a big news story. I mean, you know. So she said, "Would it be all right if I write some notes about your interview and write a little article?" And I thought, well, that would be wonderful. It's her first article. Well, so the next day in the newspaper, the headline comes out, "Professor says not everyone should own a pet or a family business." My colleagues at the university said, "You're a real world-class thinker, aren't you? Pets are family businesses." And I said, "Well, but I really meant it. Because a family business requires